My parents kicked me out. Their rival CEO adopted me. The rain felt like needles against my skin, each drop a reminder of the final cruel words my father had spat at me. "You are no son of mine." In that moment, with nothing but a backpack of art supplies and the clothes on my back, I was truly alone. But in the darkest, coldest moment of my life, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, and the man who stepped out was the last person I ever expected to offer a hand. He was my father's sworn enemy, the shark who had tried to sink our family empire for years. And in his eyes, I didn't see pity. I saw something far more dangerous: opportunity. The torrential downpour that evening seemed orchestrated, a pathetic fallacy for the complete and utter ruin of my life. Water plastered my hair to my forehead, and my thin jacket, a flimsy shield against the elements, was soaked through in seconds. I clutched the strap of my backpack, the only thing I had been allowed to grab before being physically shoved out of the grand mahogany doors of my childhood home. Inside that backpack wasn't a change of clothes or a wallet, it was my entire world. A set of charcoal pencils, a worn-out sketchbook, and half-finished oil paints. These were the tools of my trade, the very reason I was now standing on the curb, a homeless 18-year-old with a trust fund that had just been irrevocably severed. The argument had been the culmination of years of simmering resentment. My family were old money, new money, and all the money in between. My father was a titan of industry, a man who measured success in stock points and hostile takeovers. From the moment I could hold a crayon, I had been groomed to be his successor. Business school, internships at the firm, networking events with stuffy, self-important men. I was on a predetermined track, a train with no brakes heading toward a destination I never wanted. My escape was art. While my father was teaching me about leverage and acquisitions, I was in my room, teaching myself about light, shadow, and the raw emotion captured on a canvas. My art was my rebellion, my silent scream against the gilded cage of my life. The breaking point came when I turned down a full scholarship to a prestigious business school. I had, instead, secretly applied and been accepted into a fine arts program in Florence. When I broke the news, my father's face didn't just fall, it hardened into a mask of cold fury. My mother wept into her silk handkerchief, her tears a performance of maternal disappointment. The words they threw at me were sharper than any knife. A frivolous hobby, my father called my passion, a disgrace to the family name. He saw my choice not as a pursuit of happiness, but as a personal betrayal, a rejection of his legacy. The finality in his voice when he disowned me was terrifying. There was no room for negotiation, no possibility of reconciliation. I was an asset that had underperformed, and I was being liquidated. So there I was, the rain washing away the last traces of the privileged life I had known. The city lights blurred through the downpour, a beautiful, indifferent smear of color. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a character in a movie. This character was a fool, a romantic idealist who had traded a kingdom for a paintbrush. A wave of despair, cold and heavy, washed over me. I had no money, no phone, and no one to call. The friends I had grown up with were children of my father's associates. They wouldn't dare defy him. I was completely, utterly alone. I started walking, aimlessly, with no destination in mind other than away. Away from the cold, sterile mansion that had never felt like a home. Away from the suffocating expectations that had choked me for 18 years.
Each step was a struggle, the weight of my backpack and the weight of my decisions pulling me down. I found shelter under the awning of a closed-down boutique, huddling in a corner to escape the worst of the rain. The world moved on around me. Cars splashing through puddles, people hurrying home to warmth and family. I was invisible, a ghost, haunting the edges of a life I was no longer a part of. And as I sat there, shivering and broken, a pair of brilliant headlights cut through the gloom, stopping directly in front of me. A car, impossibly black and sleek, sat idling, a beacon of luxury in my sea of squalor. The door of the sedan opened, and a man emerged, holding an umbrella that looked large enough to shelter a small family. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of immense confidence and control. As he stepped closer, the light from a nearby street lamp illuminated his face, and my blood ran cold. It was a face I knew from countless business magazines and television interviews, a face that was often featured in my father's most vitriolic rants. This was the CEO of a rival tech empire, and my father's arch-nemesis. Where my father was all bluster and old-school intimidation, this man was known for his quiet, ruthless efficiency. He was a predator in a bespoke suit, a man who had built a tech empire from the ground up and now seemed to take particular pleasure in chipping away at the established order my father represented. He stopped a few feet from me, his expression unreadable. His eyes, a piercing shade of gray, scanned me from my soaked sneakers to my dripping hair. There was no pity in his gaze, no sympathy. It was a look of assessment, as if I were a commodity on the stock market, and he was calculating my value. I instinctively pulled my knees closer to my chest, a pathetic attempt to make myself smaller. I expected him to sneer, to make a cutting remark about the fallen heir. I was a piece of gossip, a juicy tidbit of corporate drama that would surely make its way back to my father. Instead, he simply stood there, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on his umbrella. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. What was he doing here? This wasn't his part of town. His headquarters were a gleaming glass tower downtown, miles away from this quiet residential street. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, calm baritone that was surprisingly devoid of any discernible emotion. He didn't ask if I was okay or if I needed help. He stated a fact. The industrialist's son, he said. It wasn't a question. He gestured towards the backpack clutched in my arms. The artist, I presume. I read about your divergence from the family path. The way he said divergence made it sound like a strategic military maneuver, not a teenage rebellion. I just nodded, unable to find my voice. What could I possibly say to this man? My father had spent years painting him as a soulless corporate raider, a man without honor. And yet, here he was, the only person who had stopped for me on the coldest night of my life. He took another step closer, and I could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne and clean rain. Your father is a fool, he said, his tone flat and matter-of-fact. He sees a painter. He doesn't see the pattern, the vision, the ability to see something where others see nothing. That's not art, kid. That's the single most valuable asset in business. I was stunned. No one had ever spoken about my art like that before. To my parents, it was a frivolity. To my teachers, it was a talent. But to this man, it was a strategic advantage. He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than cold calculation. It was a spark of intense, almost predatory interest. He has a janitorial position that just opened up in my tower, he said. The words so unexpected they barely registered. It pays minimum wage. It comes with a small,
furnished studio apartment on a lower floor. You can start tonight. My mind reeled. A janitor? Me? An heir? Scrubbing floors for my father's enemy? It was humiliating. But then he added one more sentence, a sentence that changed everything. It's not a charity, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. Consider it an investment. I'm betting on the horse your father was foolish enough to shoot. The question is, are you? The ride to the rival's tower was silent. I sat in the plush leather passenger seat, dripping water onto the immaculate floor mats, feeling like an intruder in a different dimension. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows, a kaleidoscope of colors that my artist's brain couldn't help but admire. The CEO didn't speak. He simply drove, his hands steady on the wheel, his profile a study in stoic concentration. I was acutely aware of the absurdity of the situation. 24 hours ago, I was in the back of a town car, on my way to a gala where I was expected to smile and network. Now I was heading to a janitor's closet, offered a lifeline by the devil himself. When we arrived, the building was even more imposing than I had imagined. It was a monolith of glass and steel, a beacon of modernity that seemed to pierce the night sky. It was the physical embodiment of everything my father's company was not: sleek, innovative, and utterly without sentiment. The CEO led me not to a janitor's office, but to a private elevator that whisked us up to the top floor. The doors opened into a penthouse that was less a home and more a minimalist museum. The space was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. The furniture was sparse and impossibly chic, all sharp angles and neutral tones. It was beautiful, but it was cold. It felt like a place where no one actually lived. He pointed me towards a bathroom, tossing me a fluffy white towel. "Get cleaned up," he said. "Your apartment is on the 15th floor. We'll deal with the paperwork tomorrow. Tonight, you have a job to do." My heart sank. The job? Mopping floors? Cleaning toilets? It was a humbling prospect, but I was in no position to argue. After a hot shower that felt like the greatest luxury I had ever experienced, I met him back in the living room. He was holding a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Forget the janitor position," he said, catching me off guard. "That was a test, to see if you would take it, to see if you had enough grit to swallow your pride. You passed." He handed me the portfolio. "This is a proposal for a new marketing campaign from one of our most expensive, most lauded advertising firms. They've been working on it for 6 months. The board loves it. I think it's garbage." He gestured towards a sleek modern desk. "I want you to look at it. Don't read the numbers. Don't read the market analysis. Just look at it. Tell me what you see." I was confused. I was an artist, not a marketing executive. I opened the portfolio, expecting to be overwhelmed by data and business jargon. And I was. There were graphs, projections, and demographic studies. But there were also mock-ups, print ads, storyboards for television commercials, concepts for social media campaigns. As I flipped through the pages, my initial intimidation gave way to a strange sense of clarity. I saw what he meant. The campaign was technically brilliant. It was slick, well-produced, and hit all the right demographic notes. But it was soulless. It was a collection of beautiful, empty images. It was trying to sell a lifestyle, a feeling, but it had no authentic emotion at its core. It was like a painting that was technically perfect but lacked any passion. I grabbed a sketchbook from my backpack and a charcoal pencil. For the next hour, I didn't write a single word. I drew. I sketched out new concepts, focusing on raw human moments. I reimagined the color palette, using warmer tones to evoke a sense of connection. I wasn't thinking about market share, I was thinking about telling a story. When I was finished, I pushed the sketchbook across the desk to the CEO, my heart pounding. He looked at my drawings, his face an inscrutable mask. He spent a long time on each page, his gray eyes tracing the lines I had made. Finally, he looked up at me, and a slow, thin smile spread across his lips. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from him, and it was terrifying. "You're hired," he said, "as my new special projects consultant. Your first project is to burn that proposal to the ground and build something real from the ashes." My life transformed overnight. The small, sterile studio apartment on the 15th floor became my sanctuary. It was no bigger than my old walk-in closet, but it was mine. I had a bed, a small kitchenette, and a window that looked out over the bustling city. Every morning I would wake up, not to the sound of a maid preparing breakfast, but to the symphony of the city coming to life. I would take the elevator up to the top floor, not as a janitor or a consultant, but as an apprentice. The CEO became my new professor, his office my new classroom. Our lessons were unconventional. He wouldn't teach me about balance sheets or profit margins. He assumed I could learn that on my own. Instead, he taught me about strategy, about psychology, about the art of the deal. He would sit me down and walk me through complex corporate maneuvers, not as a business transaction, but as a narrative. Every company has a story, kid, he would say, pointing to a flowchart on his tablet. Your father's story is one of tradition, of stability. It's a good story, but it's an old one. People are bored of old stories. Our story is one of innovation, of disruption. We're the future. Your job is to make them believe it. He taught me how to read people, how to spot their weaknesses and their desires. He would bring me into high-stakes meetings, not to participate, but to observe. I would sit in a corner, a silent fly on the wall, and watch as he masterfully manipulated board members, outmaneuvered rivals, and charmed investors. He was a conductor, and the boardroom was his orchestra. Under his tutelage, I began to change. The soft, romantic artist was still there, but he was now layered with a new, hardened shell. I started to see the world through his eyes. I saw patterns in chaos, opportunities in crises. I learned that my artistic sensibility wasn't a weakness in the business world. It was my greatest strength. I could visualize complex problems, see the hidden connections that others missed. I started contributing more in our sessions, offering insights that surprised even him. I was no longer just a student. I was becoming a partner. We would spend hours debating, our voices echoing in the vast, empty space of his penthouse. He would challenge my ideas, forcing me to defend them with logic and data, not just artistic intuition. It was a grueling, intense process, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was using my entire brain, the creative right side and the analytical left side, in perfect harmony. The most significant change was in my relationship with my past. The anger and hurt I felt towards my father began to cool, replaced by a strange, detached curiosity. I started to see his company not as a monolithic evil, but as a complex system with its own strengths and weaknesses. And thanks to the CEO's training, I was beginning to see those weaknesses with crystal clarity. He knew this, of course. He was cultivating me, sharpening me into a weapon to be used against his oldest foe. One afternoon, he called me into his office. On his desk was a file with my former family's company logo stamped on the front. "They're vulnerable," he said, his voice low and serious. "Your father has grown complacent. He's relying on old methods, old alliances. There's a new energy contract up for bid. It's the biggest one in a decade. It's the kind of deal that could redefine the entire industry. It's also the kind of deal that could break their company if they lose it." He looked at me, his gray eyes glinting with a predatory light. "I want you to lead our team. I want you to take everything you've learned, everything you know about your father's company, and I want you to use it to win. I want you to beat him." The weight of the CEO's request settled on me like a physical force. Lead the team against my own father? It was the ultimate test of my loyalty, a line in the sand that I was being forced to cross. A part of me, the scared, disowned kid, recoiled at the thought. But another part, the ambitious, confident apprentice the CEO had molded, felt a thrill of anticipation. This was my chance to prove myself, not just to him, but to myself. This was my chance to show my father the magnitude of his mistake. I accepted. The next few weeks were a blur of intense preparation. I assembled a team of the company's best analysts and strategists. At first, they were skeptical of this young, unknown kid who had been mysteriously appointed as their leader. But that skepticism quickly evaporated when I laid out my vision. I didn't approach the project like a traditional businessman. I approached it like an artist composing a masterpiece. I used my knowledge of my father's corporate culture, their predictable strategies, their reliance on tired old relationships to anticipate their every move. I knew how my father thought, what buttons to push, what fears to exploit. I designed our proposal not just as a business plan, but as a narrative. It was a story of progress, of a bold new future, a stark contrast to the stale narrative of stability my father's company would inevitably present. I worked tirelessly, fueled by a potent cocktail of ambition, adrenaline, and a lingering desire for revenge. I barely slept, surviving on coffee and the sheer force of my will. My studio apartment was filled with whiteboards covered in diagrams, charts, and sketches. I was in my element, creating something new and powerful out of the chaos of data and strategy. The day of the final presentation arrived. The venue was a sterile conference room in a neutral downtown hotel. As I walked in, leading my team, I felt a surge of confidence. I was wearing a tailored suit, a gift from the CEO, but underneath it, I was still the artist, ready to unveil my creation. And then I saw him. My father was standing at the head of a long table, surrounded by his team of gray-suited executives. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with the stress of the recent months. When he saw me, his expression hardened. There was a flicker of shock in his eyes, quickly replaced by a cold, burning anger. He hadn't known I was leading the opposing team. The CEO had made sure of that. For a moment, the room fell silent. All eyes were on the drama unfolding between the father and son. I held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. I was no longer the boy who had cowered in his study. I was his equal, his rival. The presentation was a masterclass in corporate warfare. I didn't just present facts and figures. I told a story. I painted a picture of the future, a future powered by our innovative technology and our bold vision. I systematically dismantled my father's proposal, not with aggression, but with quiet, irrefutable logic. I used my inside knowledge to expose the flaws in their strategy, the weaknesses in their leadership. I watched as my father's face grew paler, as his executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I was not just winning the contract, I was publicly dismantling his legacy, piece by piece. When I finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then, the head of the Energy Committee, a formidable woman who had been listening intently, slowly nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Vanderbilt," she said, her voice filled with a new respect. My father flinched at the use of my name. We had won. As I packed up my things, my father approached me. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation. "You," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You did this." I looked him straight in the eye, my own voice calm and steady. "No, father," I said. "You did this. You threw away a Vanderbilt. I'm just a Crawford now." The victory was a watershed moment, both for the company and for me personally. The news of the contract win and the dramatic role I had played in securing it spread through the industry like wildfire. I was no longer just the CEO's mysterious protege. I was a force to be reckoned with in my own right. The heir versus heir narrative was too juicy for the business press to ignore, and I became something of a minor celebrity, the disowned son who had returned to slay the corporate giant. Inside the company, my authority was now absolute. The analysts and strategists who had once questioned me now looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I had delivered a stunning victory, and in the brutal world of business, nothing mattered more than results. My relationship with the CEO evolved once again. The mentor-apprentice dynamic was replaced by something more akin to partners. He started including me in the highest-level strategic decisions, seeking my input on everything from new product development to international expansion. He would often watch me as I worked, a look of intense satisfaction on his face, like a master craftsman admiring his finest creation. He had taken a raw, unformed piece of clay and sculpted it into a weapon, and now that weapon was proving to be more effective than he had ever dared to hope. Yet, despite my success, a strange sense of unease began to creep in. I had achieved a level of power and influence I had never dreamed possible, but at what cost? I had defeated my father, but the victory felt hollow, a Pyrrhic triumph that had left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had become the very thing my parents had wanted me to be, a ruthless businessman, but I had done it on my own terms and for a different master. One evening, the CEO summoned me to his penthouse. The city lights twinkled below us, a vast, glittering carpet. He poured 2 glasses of expensive whiskey, handing one to me. "You've done well, kid," he said, his voice uncharacteristically warm, better than I ever expected. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our drinks. "I'm getting old," he said suddenly, a surprising vulnerability in his tone. "I've built this company from nothing. I've fought tooth and nail for every inch of ground I've gained, but I can't run it forever. The world is changing, and this company needs a new kind of leader to navigate the future." He turned to face me, his gray eyes serious. It needs a leader who understands both the art and the science of business. A leader who can see the future, not just analyze the past. It needs you. I was speechless. I knew where this was going, but the reality of it was still staggering. "I'm stepping down," he said, confirming my suspicions. "I'm not retiring, not completely. I'll stay on as chairman, but I'm naming you as the new CEO." The announcement sent shockwaves through the company and the entire business world. A 20-year-old, a relative newcomer, taking the helm of a Fortune 500 company was unprecedented. The board was skeptical, but the CEO's will was ironclad. He had built this empire, and he had the right to choose his successor. He spent the next month transitioning his responsibilities to me, walking me through the intricate workings of the company, introducing me to key international partners, and sharing the wisdom he had accumulated over a long and storied career. On my last day as president and my first day as CEO, he left me with one final piece of advice. We were standing in his office, or rather my office now. He pointed out the window, in the general direction of my father's former tower. "They're weak," he said, "broken. Their stock is in free fall. Their morale is shattered. It would be easy to finish them off, to acquire their assets, dismantle their company, and erase the family name from the business world forever. It would be the logical move, the ruthless move." He paused, his eyes fixed on me. "But you're not me, kid. You're something new. The way you handle this will define your legacy. Will you be the destroyer who avenges his past, or will you be the creator who builds a new future? The choice is yours." The weight of the CEO title was immense, a heavy crown that settled on my head the moment the older man's words sank in. I was now the master of this domain, the captain of this ship. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of board meetings, press conferences, and strategic planning sessions. I was the youngest CEO in the company's history, a fact that was constantly mentioned in the media, usually with a mix of fascination and condescension. I had to work twice as hard to earn the respect of the old guard, the executives who had been with the company for decades and who saw me as an upstart, a lucky kid who had been in the right place at the right time. But I had been trained by the best. I was calm, decisive, and I had a vision for the company that was both bold and compelling. I wasn't just maintaining the status quo, I was actively pushing the boundaries of innovation, investing in risky new technologies, and championing a more creative, human-centric corporate culture. But the question the former CEO had left me with lingered in my mind, a constant, nagging presence. What to do about my father's former company? The ruthless, logical part of my brain, the part the older man had so carefully cultivated, saw a golden opportunity. The company was a wounded animal, ripe for a hostile takeover. I could absorb their assets, consolidate their market share, and deliver a knockout blow that would be talked about in business schools for years to come. It would be the ultimate revenge, a final triumphant act that would erase the shame of my dissonance. I spent long nights in my office, staring at the financial projections, the merger and acquisition scenarios laid out by my team. The numbers were compelling, the logic was sound. But every time I thought about pulling the trigger, a wave of something cold and unpleasant washed over me. It wasn't remorse, it was something else, a feeling that I was about to make a terrible mistake, that I was about to become a caricature of myself, a villain in a story of my own making. One afternoon, I found myself wandering through the art district, a part of the city I hadn't visited since I'd been kicked out. I walked into a small, independent gallery drawn by a vibrant painting in the window. As I looked at the art, surrounded by the energy and passion of the creative community, I had an epiphany. I had been so focused on the business, on the game, that I had forgotten why I started down this path. It wasn't about revenge. It was about proving my worth. It was about showing the world that there was a different way to do things, a way that blended creativity with commerce, intuition with analysis. Destroying my father's company wouldn't prove anything. It would just be more of the same old corporate warfare, a story as old as time. The truly bold move, the truly innovative move, was to break the cycle. The next day, I called a meeting of my executive team. I laid out a new plan, a plan that left them stunned. Instead of a hostile takeover, I proposed a merger. Not a merger of equals, but a strategic acquisition, a partnership. We wouldn't dismantle the old company. We would invest in it.
We would infuse it with new capital, new technology, and new ideas. We would combine their established infrastructure and market reach with our innovative culture and cutting-edge products. We would take the best of both worlds, the old and the new, the tradition and the future, and create something stronger, something better. It was a risky, unprecedented move. It was an act of compassion, but it was also a brilliant business strategy. It would give us an unassailable market position, and it would generate an immense amount of goodwill, painting me not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a visionary leader. The deal was complex and difficult, but in the end, my vision prevailed. I sat across the negotiating table from my father one last time, not as an enemy, but as a partner. The look in his eyes was no longer one of anger, but of grudging respect. He had lost his company, but in a way, he had also been saved. He would stay on as a figurehead, a member of the new combined board, but the era of my father was over. The era of the new empire had begun. Today, I stand in my office, the same office where the CEO offered me a janitor's job. The view is the same, but I see it differently. I see the city not as a battlefield, but as a canvas, a place of infinite possibility. On my desk, next to my tablet and my financial reports, is a sketchbook. I still draw, every day. It reminds me of where I came from and of the journey that brought me here. I am a CEO, an artist, a son, a rival. I am all of these things, and I am none of them. I am simply myself, and for the first time in my life, that is more than enough. My parents kicked me out, and their rival CEO adopted me. But in the end, I didn't just inherit a kingdom, I created my own.